Your prediction model is only as good as the assumptions it hides. That's the line to keep in mind, because if you don't understand the shape of football, how often champions dominate, how often draws appear, how low relegated teams actually sink, then it doesn't matter how big your supercomputer is. 10,000 simulations won't save you. You'll just be very confident and very wrong. That's how you end up giving a weighing toast that starts with, "We always thought Steve would marry his spreadsheets." So, picture being at the pub with your buddies, talking about the upcoming season. If Vom said, Burnley's gonna win the league with 92 points this year, you'd laugh a mile a ring. If they say Liverpool are getting relegated, you'd grab your phone, make them say it again, and record it, post it on Threads, post it on Instagram, wherever you post, so the whole world could mock them. And if they tried to save face with, no, you don't get it, I used a spreadsheet and ran simulations and did all this fancy math to prove it, I have math on my side, well, that's when they earn a nickname they'll never live down. It's gonna be, you know how guys are, it's gonna be something painfully literal, like Spreadsheet Steve. Not the most creative, but repeat it enough, let it creep into the group chat, and by the end of the night, you're writing your best man's toast, calling him Spreadsheet Steve, and talking about how you always thought he'd marry Excel. Math people have lots of fancy words for what we're talking about here. Bayesians call them friars, statisticians call it a data generating process, causal modelers sketch them as DAGs, but strip away the jargon, that's what we do here. It's really simple. You always start any question with some sense of what the world looks like. These are reality checks. They're the things you'd mock your mates for getting wrong at the pub. And you already know what they look like in football. Champions don't just win, they dominate, often finishing in the high 90s in the EPL. Relegated teams don't scrape by in the mid-30s, they find spectacular ways to collapse. And the best matches, City versus Liverpool at full tilt, aren't predictable. Those are the fixtures you wake up early for, especially in the west coast of America. Those are the ones you remember years later. These aren't equations, they are the lived truths of football. And if your model misses them, it's not that you need more data or more sims, you need one of your buddies to shake their head at you and threaten to give you a nickname that will never live down no matter how hard you try. So that brings us to Opta's so-called supercomputer they brag about. Every summer it spits out a Premier League table, and every summer it feels off. Not absurd, not crazy, look at it, okay, it kind of makes sense, but it looks off. It's the kind of table that looks fine until you hold it up against actual history. There's some hidden truths here of statistical model. The first is that champions finished around 90 points. A model that crowns a champion at 72 isn't cautious, it's breaking. 71 points, for example, is 20 wins, 11 draws, and 7 losses. That's not a title-winning side. Can you imagine seeing that? That's like 4th place. Reality looks more like this. Looks like City and the Centurions in 2017-2018. Following up the next season with 98. Then Liverpool coming in at 99. City again coming in at 93. These happen far too often to be the once-in-a-century crazy outcomes they would have to be if you had 71 as the winner. In the Pep versus Klopp era, the high 90s became routine when you watched such great competitive football. And any model that treats those as extreme outliers isn't describing reality as we know it. Relegation happens under 35 points. So last season, 24-25, Southampton went down with 12 points, Ipswich and Leicester followed with 22 and 25. It was a historically bad season, I'll give you that, but not that far from what we normally see, especially sort of in that mid-range there. Yet Opta's tables often show relegated sides comfortably in the high 30s. That's not the league we just watched. That's not the world where 40 guarantees you safety. Sorry, Villa fans. So that brings us to the hidden truth. Here's where it gets deeper. It's not just what Opta shows you. It's what they smooth away and may not even know they're doing. The first is flattened differences. And their math, and a lot of these models in general, drags everyone toward the middle. But the extremes, City running away with 98 or 100 points, Derby fans falling to 11, are the story of football, and these sort of things happen. The next idea is they have sanded tails, we're going to call them. The outliers Opta erases keep happening. Champions and disasters aren't accidents, they're features of the lead. Champions score really high, relegation teams score really low. That's just how it works, and by smoothing, sanding, whatever you want to call up the tails, that's when you end up seeing some problems. Even matches aren't lopsided. So, as a thought experiment, if you cloned a team and had them play itself, you would see a coin flip, right? I guess it would be a three-sided coin. You'd see 33, 33, 33. That's the baseline, and only randomness would sort of separate the outcomes here. So if you look and you see a model that spits out Arsenal-Liverpool like 60, 10, 30, that's just a miss, right? That erases the very drama that makes those fixtures unmissable. On the other side, uneven matches are lopsided. When City hosts Burnley, let's say, it's not like 70, 20, 10. You wouldn't expect to see City wins 7 times out of 10, Burnley 10 times. In the supercomputer language, you'd expect to see City drop points 3,000 times out of the 10,000. That's not logical. It's more like 9 times out of 10 you'd expect him to win, and 1 out of 10 you'd expect him to drop points. That's why the big 6 march like zombies up the table, suffocating everyone else, flatten that edge, and champions shrink while relegation teams look safe. Ask anyone what happens. Ask Liverpool for all those years in Arsenal. What happens to City after December? They just do that march up the table for so many years. It's just not logical they only win 70% of the time in these games. Home advantage is not optional. Everyone knows that home grounds matter. Crowds sway rafts, travel saps legs. City at the Etihad isn't the same as City away at Wolves. Liverpool at Anfield is certainly not the same as Liverpool at Turf Moor. And then obviously there's the famous Fergie time back from the 2000s, giving Sir Alex a little bit of extra time to pull that win out at Old Trafford. If your model erases that, it's erasing football's sharpest edge. So now let's talk about Motson, the model I've been building, the model I've been sharing with you all for a couple weeks now. It takes a very different path than Opta and a lot of the commercial models. It doesn't just recycle the same inputs and hope for the best. It builds in the scaffolding that football demands by the nature of the game to fit reality. A logit link function maps strength gaps into probability, powered by latent strength parameters, so Burnley never gets mistaken for City. A home advantage intercept shift moves the baseline every time a team walks into Anfield or the Etihad. Instead of pulling everyone into the middle for those nice flat percentages, Motson uses hierarchical priors and controlled shrinkage, enough to stabilize predictions early, but not so much that champions turn into a 72-point side. We had a draw inflation parameter that forces the league's natural 20% draw rate back into the forecast instead of watching it balloon up to 25 or more. And with over-dispersion control, the tails live. That's how you get to see these mismatches like 96-4 for City against Burnley, instead of every game with a good side versus a bad side looking like 70-20-10. When Motson runs Monte Carlo draws to simulate all those seasons, the calibration actually works. 70% favorites win about 70% of the time. Opta calls theirs a supercomputer. We call Motson a model that at least passes the calibration curve test. But here's the real point. Motson is honest to the structural realities of football that we all see, that we all know. You know, the worst striker on a relegation side would still walk into almost any other league in the world, right? They're better than anyone you went to school with, better than most internationals. But they're not Erling Haaland. Even someone like Liam Delap, a very good striker in his own right, isn't Erling Haaland. That's the analogy I think of when I think of sort of modeling it with the traditional ways and getting these 72 points for the champions and 35 for relegation tables. Liam Delap is fine, but he's not Erling Haaland. Those tiny differences between those two, repeated over 38 matches, are what separate champions from survivors. Motson sees the difference, while Opta and others smooth them away. So here's the moral of the story. Models are only as good as the assumptions they hide and the gut checks they survive. Your most important tool isn't a supercomputer, it isn't fancy math, it's understanding what you're modeling, understanding all those terms about the data generating process and priors, DADs, all these sorts of things. Using your gut, looking at the data, seeing them, understanding them, and then mapping the fancy math onto that. That's how you get the season right. That's how you survive. If you ignore that, you risk becoming Spreadsheet Steve and a life of mockery from your buddies. Trust me, that's not a nickname you want in your wedding toast. Thanks everybody, it was great seeing you. Come back next time, click subscribe, click like, share with your friends, do all those things you're supposed to do, and I'll see you next time.